How to Knit My First Sweater, an easy top-down design by Loopy Mango. You can download this free pattern on our website. The link is in the description. This video will take you through the entire knitting process, step by step. This is a beginner-friendly project. If you have never knitted a sweater before, or if you want to learn how to knit a top-down design, this video is for you. There are 3 parts to this project: yoke, body, and sleeves. This design is seamless and is knit in the round. The length of the body and of the sleeves are very easy to adjust. We will be starting at the neck and working our way down to the bottom and end with the sleeves. This will be a quick project since we're using chunky yarn. You can finish it in just a couple of days. Let's begin. We're going to start out with size 17 12mm needles, and this is our first ball of yarn. You can pull the yarn from the inside or from the outside. So I prefer to pull it from the inside. This way, when you pull on the yarn, the ball of yarn stays in one place and doesn't move around. If you see how you just pull on it and it stays in one place. If you do it from the outside, it constantly moves around. But it's definitely personal preference, so you should do it the way that you prefer. We're going to start with making a slip knot. Slip knot is counted as your first stitch, and then we're casting on for the neckline. In this example, we're making size small medium. If you're doing a different size, just follow the pattern. When you're done casting on, make sure to count your stitches twice to make sure you didn't make a mistake. And now we're going to connect our first round. It's important to check that you're not accidentally twisting. So if your stitches look like this, you have a twist, untwist, carefully arrange your stitches so that they're all facing in the same direction. I like to use a piece of yarn in a contrasting color as my stitch marker. This way you know when you get to the end of the round. And connect your first round. First 10 rounds are going to be a rib stitch. So 1 knit, 1 purl, which means you connect the round with a knit stitch. We just connected our first round and we knitted the first stitch, which is a knit. The second stitch is a purl. We do have separate videos in our library for all the stitches covered in this tutorial, so definitely if this isn't something that you've done in the past, you can watch those video tutorials. So this is our first round, and it's a rib stitch, a 1 by 1 rib, which means 1 knit, 1 purl. And we will keep going like this. So you can move the stitches around the needle. With your first round, you have to kind of put a little bit more effort into moving them around. When you have more rounds, it gets much easier. So we keep doing the rib stitch for the first 10 rounds. And after every round, just keep moving that stitch marker. So right now we're at the end of our 10th round. and we always want to make sure, do we really have 10 rounds or more or less? So you want to count your rounds, and this is how you count. We're going to disregard the cast on, so cast on is not counted as a round, so that's the cast on. We're not counting it, and we start counting those horizontal strands, those bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we have knitted 10 rounds. We're now going to introduce the bigger needle, so it's size 19, 15 millimeters. The next round, round 11, is going to be knitted using that needle, and you're going to transfer the stitches as you're knitting them. Just for this one round, you can put the stitch marker out, otherwise it's just going to fall out. So follow the pattern. It's knit 1 and then KFB. If you haven't done KFB before, we have a separate video tutorial for it. It's a way to increase stitches. So you knit through the back and the front. So KFB, knit front and back. And you alternate a knit stitch and then KFB. Knit through the front of the stitch and then knit through the back of the same stitch. Alternate knit 1 and then increase KFB, knit through the front and knit through the back. We started out with 28 stitches, so by the end of this round you are going to have 42 stitches. So we have just finished knitting round 11. All the stitches are now on size 19 needles. You no longer need size 17 until later on. So you can put the stitch marker back on your needles. And round 12 is just purl. So make sure you count. We are now going to purl 42 stitches. We're now at the end of round 12. Round 13 is going to be an increase round again, but it's a little bit different pattern. So instead of K1, KFB, we're doing KFB, K2. So we start with a KFB, knit through front, and then knit through back. So 1 stitch increase, and then 2 knit stitches. Knit, knit. And then we have again KFB, knit through the front, and then knit through the back of the stitch. Then you alternate this pattern to the end of the round. When you get to the end of the round, please count. You need to be at 56 stitches. If you're not at 56, you may have to undo. Counting is very important. I recommend always counting twice. So we're finishing up round 13. Round 14 is going to be a purl round. Before you get started with round 14, you're going to need 3 more stitch markers. We recommend that you use different color. When you use a different color as a marker to mark your rounds and other stitch markers in a different color, it will make your knitting project much more enjoyable because you will know exactly when the next round starts. So we have 3 more stitch markers and they're in a different color. So we're using hot pink as the marker to denote beginning of the round. Purl 20 stitches. So 20 stitches from the marker and place another marker. Then purl 8 stitches. Eight, place marker. Purl another 20 stitches and place another marker. So this is our last marker and we have 8 more stitches to purl in this round. We're now ready to do round 15. So you can see all the markers. With round 15, we knit the first stitch regular knit, and then we're going to do M1L, which is a left leaning increase. And this is how it is worked. You put that strand in between stitches onto the needle and you knit through the back of it. If you have never done M1L, we have a separate video tutorial for it. Then you keep knitting the stitches until you have 1 stitch remaining before the next marker. So you're knitting, 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 you see your next marker, there's 1 stitch remaining before that marker, and we're going to do an increase. In this case, it's M1R, so a right leaning increase. And we're knitting through the front. It's very important that you pick up that strand of yarn in the right direction. So if you've never done it before, I highly recommend you watch M1L and M1R video tutorials that we have as separate videos. Okay, move the marker, knit 1, and then M1L again. M1L, a left leaning increase, and then knit stitches until 1 stitch before marker. We're now ready to do M1R, a right leaning increase. So we're ready to move that marker again. So you can clearly see those increases. This was M1L. You see that stitch leaning to the left. And compare it to M1R. You see how that little strand of yarn is leaning to the right? So that was a right leaning increase. Knit 1, M1L. Knit the stitches in between until you have one stitch remaining before the marker. One stitch remaining, M1R increase. Knit the stitch before the marker. And we have our last remaining repeat. So essentially you're repeating that pattern 4 times. So you have 4 sections, you have 4 stitch markers, there's 4 sets of stitches, and you're basically knitting same thing, and for each set you're increasing 2 stitches. So you have 4 sets times 2, 8. When we get to the end of this round, your stitch count is going to increase by 8. So we went from 56 stitches total on your needles to 64. If you don't have 64, if you have a different number, it means you made a mistake and you have to unravel until you get to the right number of stitches. Until you get to basically to the round where the number of stitches matches what's in the pattern. So it's very important that you count after every round, especially if that round has increases or decreases. You move the stitch marker, and round 16 is easy. It's all just a purl round. No increases here, just all purl stitches. We're at the end of round 16. We're finishing up that purl round. And round 17 is going to be a knit round. So no increases here, just all knit. Pretty easy, just knit stitches all the way around. Just keep knitting until you get to the end of the round. We're at the end of round 17. It's a knit round. And round 18 is going to be a purl round. So pretty much all even numbered rounds for this pattern are purl rounds. And odd numbered rounds are knit rounds. Sometimes you have an increase, sometimes you don't, but it's always a knit stitch. So, and what's happening here now, it's a 4 round repeat. You're going to repeat the last 4 rounds as many times as the pattern calls for. Rounds 35 and 36 are just a repeat of round 15 and 16. So now we are finished with 36 rounds if you're making size small. So you can see that we are almost done with the yoke. We have the neckline, and then we have the rest of the yoke. At this point, we are done with increases. You see that's the shaping of the sleeve. And we have same thing on the other side. And then the front and back panels in between. We're going to need some stitch holders. What we have here is just 2 strands of yarn. You can use any waste yarn for this purpose. And we're going to transfer the stitches for the sleeves onto these stitch holders. First, we're going to knit the stitches for one of the front or the back. It doesn't really matter. Front and back are the same. So let's call it the front. And we'll transfer the sleeve stitches onto the stitch holder. So knitting the front now, using the knit stitch. If you're doing size small, it's 32 stitches. For other sizes, please refer to your pattern. You're basically just knitting until you get to the first stitch marker. Okay, take the stitch marker off. Next section is the sleeve. So we're transferring those stitches onto the stitch holder. It's 20 stitches for the size we're making. So just carefully take them off the needle one by one until you get to the next stitch marker. I'm using contrasting colors so that it's easier for you to see, but you can use any color yarn. Remove the stitch marker for now. And organize your stitches. You don't want them falling off. You don't want anything to unravel. So here's the first sleeve. What I like to do is just tie the string into a bow and leave it like this. We're now going to cast on one stitch. This is for the underarm. Put the stitch marker to mark the side. Cast on one more stitch. We're using backward loop method to cast on those 2 stitches. Stitch marker in the middle. That's the one side. And now we're going to knit the back of the sweater. We're using the knit stitch here, so knitting the second set of stitches. For the size we're making, it's 32 stitches, or we're just doing it until we hit the next stitch marker. And this is our sleeve. So back and front of the sweater is the same. And just keep knitting until you get to the next stitch marker. We are almost there. The back of the sweater is now done. Remove the stitch marker and transfer stitches for the second sleeve onto your second stitch holder. Carefully, one by one, no need to rush. You don't want to lose any of those stitches, especially if you've never done this before. And here's the last couple stitches of the sleeve. So same thing, let's organize the sleeve. We don't want to lose any stitches. Again, tying this yarn into a bow. And cast on one stitch using backward loop method. Put the stitch marker to mark the side. Cast on one more for the underarm. Round 38 is a purl round. So 38 is all purl. But let's see what we have here. We're done with the yoke, and now we will be knitting the body. You can clearly see one sleeve, another sleeve, and what's in the middle is the body of the sweater. So the yoke is done, neck, the rest of the yoke, the sleeves, and the body. So we keep repeating knit and purl rounds until we get to the rib on the bottom of the sweater. While I was knitting the yoke, at one point it became uncomfortable for me to have the stitches on the shorter needle, so I have transferred them onto the longer one. There's no strict rules at what point you want to do it, just kind of see if they're too bunched up, transfer them onto the longer needle. Okay, so we can now clearly see the shape of the sweater. This is where the sleeves are going to go, and the body is almost finished. We just need to do a few stitches, rather few rows of the rib, but we're done with the knit rows and the purl rows. So you want to make sure that you have the right number of rounds. So here's how to count. You disregard the cast on round, so that's the cast on, we don't count it. And then you can clearly see these horizontal bars. Each bar designates a round, so you want to count all those bars. And you will be counting all the way until you get to stitches on your knitting needles. So count every horizontal bar. It helps to have a knitting needle that you can use so that you can see it better. And you count all the way up, and this would be the last bar. Make sure it matches the pattern, and you should have ended on the purl round. Now we're going to do a rib, and we will be using the smaller needles, so size 17 needles. Make sure you have those handy. And we start the 1x1 rib. Remember, it's the same stitch as what you did when you started the sweater. So 1 knit, 1 purl going in the round. So we just introduced the smaller needle, and you're transferring the stitches as you're knitting them. You're transferring from the bigger needle, size 19, to the smaller needle, size 17, as you're knitting that first round of 1x1 rib. So 1 knit, 1 purl. If you made it to this point in the project, you should be pretty good with a rib stitch. We're getting to the end of the first rib round. We're going to remove the bigger needle. We no longer need it for the body of the sweater, but we do need that stitch marker. At this point, it's okay to just keep one marker just to designate the beginning of the round. So a knit and a purl, and repeat. Knit, purl, and keep knitting until you're done. So we're done with the rib stitches, and now we are ready to cast off. We will be casting off in pattern, in this case the rib pattern. What does that mean? If you've never cast off in pattern, it just means whatever pattern you were doing, you're going to continue, and you're doing that pattern as you're casting off. So this is a 1x1 rib, so we're going to do 1 knit, 1 purl. We're continuing with the pattern, and now we cast off. There's different ways to cast off. If you prefer a different way, that's fine, but this is the method we recommend for this project. And again, you keep adding 1 stitch in pattern, and then you pull the yarn over to cast off. So here you can see it a little bit more closely. So knit, 2 stitches on the right needle, cast off, change the direction of the yarn for purl, purl stitch, cast off. You can either use your finger or the left needle when you're casting off, whichever way you find easier, more convenient for you. It's completely personal preference. There's no strict rules. And continue going around and casting off. We're at the end of the cast off round here. There's just one little trick I would like to show you when you're completely done. So we're down to last stitch. That's a purl, cast off. So don't cut the yarn just yet. You want to have a smooth transition without any jumps. So what you do, you kind of connect that round with one more knit stitch. And now we're ready to cut the yarn. We will do finishing at the end when we're done with the sleeves. And then pull the yarn through and secure it. So the body is done. We just have to do the sleeves. This is the body, and only the sleeves to go. For the sleeves, we're going to use size 19 needles. Shorter length works better. You can use longer one, and then you'll just need to do magic loop to deal with the excess wire. We are going to pick up a total of 6 stitches here, so 3 on each side. So 3 stitches pick up, then knit all the stitches off of the stitch holder and pick up 3 more. And you can kind of figure out where the middle is. You can approximate and then tie the yarn on the inside to make sure it's secure. We're gonna go clockwise, so take the needle, size 19, same needle that you used for the body. And kind of map out the 3 places where you're going to insert the needle. So I don't like to pick it up with just one strand. I like to pick up 2 strands to make it kind of a little bit more secure. So this is 1. Then we're picking up 2 strands again, 2, and we need just 1 more. 3. So we picked up 3 stitches, and now we're going to knit the stitches off of the stitch marker. And I'm sorry, the stitch holder. So you will notice that I'm not removing the stitch holder. I'm leaving it in. Make sure you insert the needle knitwise because you're picking up using knit stitches. So just pretend that they are on a knitting needle. If it helps you, if you have an extra needle, you can go ahead and put those stitches on the needle first. But I find it kind of easy to just knit them off of that piece of yarn. And we're just going around picking up one by one. We have just a couple more to go. And then the last one. So there's one more there on the stitch holder. So this is the last one. And then we need to pick up 3 more stitches in the underarm. So let's see where they're going to go. So that looks like a good spot. And then a couple more. So there's definitely enough space. So insert the needle, yarn over. That's 1, 2, and 3. And count all the stitches. Check that you have the right number compared to what's in the pattern. And don't pull the stitch holder out until you're done with the sleeve. It's going to help you count your rounds. And don't forget about the stitch marker to mark the rounds. So we picked up using a knit stitch, but for this pattern we alternate knit rows and purl rows. So the next row, or round rather, is going to be a purl round. So you're basically doing the same thing as you did for the body. You're alternating knit rounds and purl rounds. And let's see now how that stitch holder is going to help us count the rounds. So you see that strand of yarn above the stitch holder? So that first round that we did when we were picking up, that's 1. And here we knitted the second one, so you see 2 strands. So that will help you. And just keep going until you're done with the knit and purl rounds. We're now at the end of the last purl round, right before the cuff. So now we are going to do the cuff. First round of the cuff is going to be knit 2 together. Before you start doing cuff, make sure to count your rows. So this is why we left that strand of yarn in there. It makes it so much easier for you to see when the sleeve started. So this is the first round. 1, 2, 3. So count those horizontal bars all the way to the stitches on the needle, and make sure it matches what's in the pattern for the size that you're making. And now we're ready to do the cuff. Knit 2 together. If you haven't done this stitch, we have a separate video in our YouTube channel. So you insert the needle through 2 stitches at the same time, yarn over, and pull it through. So knit 2 together. And we're going to repeat this until you're down to 2 stitches remaining in this round. So we have 2 stitches remaining, and instead of doing knit 2 together, we're going to knit 2 of them. And the reason is that we need to have even number of stitches in order to be able to do the rib stitch in the round. It's possible that for the size you're making, that ending is slightly different. So just refer to the pattern in case you're making a different size. For size small, you should end up with 14 stitches on your needle. And now we're going to do a 1 by 1 rib. So 1 knit, 1 purl, all the way around. This is a stitch that we have done multiple times in this project. By this time you should be quite proficient. So 1 knit, 1 purl. And you should be ending your calf rounds on a purl stitch. If you didn't, you made a mistake and you need to go back. So here we have a little bit of an issue with the cable being too long. You can use double pointed needles. This is a little bit outside the scope for this video. So we prefer to do what is called a magic loop. There's many different variations. All it really means is that when your cable is too long, you just pull the excess cable out. And this way, it allows you to more easily work with the stitches, like so. So you keep knitting the stitches off of the needle. And you're just going around. And okay, well, I was going a little bit too fast. And I made a bit of a mess. If you see that it happens, undo the stitches that look messy and put them back on the needle. So now we are back on track. Don't forget to keep changing the direction of the yarn. Yarn stays in the back for knit and in the front for purl. Okay, so now we are going to rearrange the stitches again. You just push them to the edge of your left needle and you pull that excess cable out. And you keep going. So right now we are using a 20-inch needle. It's 20 inches in length. You're still able to do magic loop with this length of a needle and just keep going. Let's say you have even a much longer cable. So here I switched out my needles to do this demonstration. These needles have 32-inch length cable. And that's no problem. It's just your excess cable is longer in this case, but it doesn't really matter because it just sits there and you can ignore it. You're only concerned with those few stitches that are on your needles. Magic loop is really a great technique. If you master it, you can pretty much use any length of the needle. So if your needle is too long, it's not a problem. See, just carefully push the needles, push the stitches to the tip of the needle for your left needle and pull the right needle out and keep going. Careful not to lose your stitch marker. So here's our stitch marker. We're starting a new round. 1 knit, 1 purl. Change the direction for purl, purl, and keep repeating the rib stitch all the way to the end of the round. Okay, rearrange the stitches again. It's probably not the most comfortable thing in the world, but we prefer to use magic loop to double pointed needles. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using DPNs. If that's your preference, great. So this is a knit stitch. By this time, hopefully you're able to tell the difference between knit and purl. So if you're seeing a V, you're going to knit that stitch. And if you see that little horizontal strand of yarn, that's going to be your purl. We knit the knits and we purl the purls when we're doing a rib stitch. And just keep going until we are ready to cast off. We're now ready to cast off. We're going to cast off in pattern. So same thing we did for the bottom of the sweater. You knit one, purl one, and cast off. Next stitch is a knit, sew, knit one, cast off. Next we have a purl, purl, cast off. And keep going, casting off all the way around until you get to the end. We have just a few more stitches to go. So be careful here. If you lose a stitch, just put it back onto the needle and push the remaining stitches to the close to the tip of the left needle and cast off the rest of them. We're down to the last stitch. And here we want to make sure we have a clean transition. So we're going to end with a knit stitch. So insert the needle right there, a knit stitch, and we're done. So you can cut the yarn depending on how you're going to weave it in. Because this is chunky merino wool, you only need to leave just a few inches. You don't need to have a very long tail. Okay, so it's nice and secure. And you're going to do the same for the other sleeve. So here we have both sleeves finished. You can take out that stitch holder. And we are going to weave in the ends. You can use your favorite method. We like to just use a felting needle, or you can simply just weave it in. All you're doing is just hiding it in between the stitches on the inside of the sweater, like so. But if you know some other way that you prefer to use, that's fine. You can use a regular felting needle, or there's a great tool made by Clover. So it comes with 3 felting needles. Here we took one out. For this thickness of yarn, 2 needles work the best. And you can secure that little end by felting it. Just be very careful because that needle is quite sharp. We have a separate video that shows how to felt the ends in more detail. You can also use this felting needle to join yarn, so be careful, it's very sharp. If you've never used it before, just go slow. Okay, so this is completely seamless, and you can repeat this for all other ends. You should have only 4 ends in this sweater. And we're done. And you have a very cute sweater here. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we have a lot more video tutorials for you on Loopy Mango YouTube channel. Knitting pattern for this sweater is completely free. You can download it on loopymango.com.